with that, it is 11 o'clock, so we'd like to go ahead and get started. Um, First of all, thank you for your time in joining on this webinar quickly. We have been partnering with the SBA since the middle of last week to anticipate the declaration that came over the weekend so that we could get you all this information just as quickly as possible. So the primary focus of our presentation today is going to come from Dave Lentil. He's with the Small Business Administration. He's based in Des Moines. Just a couple of things before we get started. First, could you please just double check and make sure that everyone who's not speaking, that your audio is muted. We're going to try and have some time for some limited questions. There's so many of you on the call that it will be probably impossible to answer all of your questions. So I'd ask that you defer to asking any questions through the chat until we're done with the presentation, because I think a lot of your questions will be able to be answered through the course of Dave's presentation here in the next few minutes. So we'll use the chat for that. Again, once Dave is done, I will continue to moderate some dialogue with some of our other partners who are on the line today. So first, we're going to hear from Dave from the SBA. He's going to do a presentation specific on the SBA's disaster assistance loans that as of Saturday, businesses in the state of Iowa qualify for. So he's going to talk about what they are, terms, requirements, and ultimately how to apply. We have some other representatives on the line that we hope to hear from at the end, including Scott Swenson from the Small Business Development Center, and then just a few of our banking partners, representatives from Farmers State Banks, Trust, on the call. I know there are others of you on. I guess what I will say is afterwards and through this all, continue to partner with your local financial institution as you navigate these programs. They will be huge assets for you. So with that, I've got 200 people on the line. I want to go ahead and get started. So Dave, at this point, I'll toss it to you to really begin talking through these programs.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
All right. We'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I know we've been waiting a while here in Iowa to make these programs available to small businesses. But as Nick said, as of Saturday, the state of Iowa is now eligible for small businesses and certain nonprofits in the state of Iowa to apply for economic injury disaster loans through the U.S. Small Business Administration. Essentially, they are working capital loans that are available to small businesses, small agricultural cooperatives, aquaculture, most nonprofit organizations. These are going to be businesses that are directly affected by the disaster. Those that offer services directly related to the businesses in the declaration or businesses themselves. I mean, really, it's not hard with the level of economic injury that's going on out there for nearly every small business in the state of Iowa to qualify to apply for these loans. When we're looking at the criteria for loan approval, we're going to look at credit history. And when we talk about credit history, we mean what was the business's credit history before the disaster occurred. You know, did they have good credit before all of this started happening? That's what we're going to make our credit basis on. Repayment, the same thing. You know, in order to qualify for these loans, you've got to be able to demonstrate that you have the ability to repay them. But again, we are going to look at what a business's financial situation was prior to the disaster. So, you know, if they were in a financial situation where they could have repaid the loan before the disaster occurred, then that's what we're going to base our decision on. And then certainly they need to be an eligible business, and we'll talk about some businesses that are not eligible to apply for these loans. Loans are available up to $2 million. The interest rates for these loans are 3.75% for small businesses and 2.75% for nonprofits. Maximum term is 30 years, and as I understand it, that's going to be the max term that we put on all of these. Um, Certainly, if you have the ability or want to pay them off before the 30-year term is up, you can do that without penalty. But that is going to be the maximum term. They can be used to pay fixed debts, payroll, accounts payable, and other bills that could have been paid had the disaster not occurred. They're not intended to replace lost sales or profits. They're not intended for expansion. They're also not intended for you to use them to repay existing debts. So let's say you have a business loan already, whether it was an SBA loan or a conventional commercial loan. You can't use the economic injury disaster loans to repay those loans, but you can use the economic injury disaster loans to make the payments on those loans. Um, Economic injury disaster loans over 25,000 will require collateral if it's available, and we are looking at personal real estate at collateral if it's available. We won't decline a loan for lack of collateral. But again, if you have collateral, if you have equity in a personal residence, SBA is going to require a personal guarantee and a pledge of that collateral. Um, I'm not going to get down into the weeds on this particular slide because again, nearly every business in the state of Iowa has been impacted by this to some degree, and can probably make a case for economic injury. Um, the funds come directly from the U.S. Treasury. You're not going to go through a bank to apply. You would go to disasterloan.sba.gov to apply. There is no cost to apply. There's no obligation to take the loan if it's offered. So while I'm not going to discuss some of the congressional proposals that are out there for additional small business assistance, even though some of those may come from SBA, uh, what we're recommending right now is we know that there probably are going to be some other things that come down that are going to be available, but we're recommending that folks go ahead and apply for these economic injury disaster loans if they're eligible. Uh, that way, if you get an approval, then you're going to have the option to take those funds or see if there is a better option available by the time you get your approval. Again, the maximum unsecured amount is 25,000. If you take 25,000 or less, you don't have to pledge collateral. Loans over 25,000 up to 2 million must be secured to the maximum amount possible. You can have an existing SBA disaster loan. You can have existing SBA loans and still qualify for these, but we can't consolidate the loans. One thing I wanted to mention about the 3.75% interest rate, we do know that the Fed has effectively lowered interest rates to zero, but statutorily right now, with the program set up as it is, 3.75 is what is in the statute. That may change. Congress may change that. We don't know. But right now, the 3.75 is the interest rate that is going to be charged on these loans unless something changes. Another thing that I do want to make sure that I mention is it was announced today that there will be a 1-year deferment on all approved SBA economic injury disaster loans. And that will be, as I understand it, an automatic deferral. You will not have to ask SBA for that. Basic filing requirements. There's a completed loan application. When you go into the online application, you will fill out the Form 5 or the Form 5C. The Form 5 is for the Form 5C is for nonprofit. Form 5C is for sole proprietorships. The Form 5 is for all other forms of business. And it will ask you when you register, are you a sole proprietorship or are you something else? And it will take you into the appropriate form. And you will be able to fill that directly out online. we'll have to have tax information authorization from you. We'll have to have you fill out a what's called a 4506T if you're not familiar with that. Essentially, that gives SBA permission to get your tax transcripts from IRS so that we can see your tax information for the applicant, the principals, and any affiliates. And what we mean by the applicant is the small business. What we mean by the principal is any owners. Uh, Complete copies of the most recent federal tax return. We understand this requirement is being waived for loans of 500,000 or less. So if you're applying for a loan of 500,000 or less, it looks like you'll not have to include your federal tax returns. Schedule of liabilities, that's something if you have on hand, you can upload, or again, within the system, you can fill out the SBA Form 2202, the same with the personal financial statement. If you have an existing PFS, you'll be able to upload that in the system or use the SBA Form 413. If you want to do paper applications, you can, and I'll give you the website for where you can download those forms from. But we really encourage people to file electronically. It's easier, faster, more accurate, gets you into the system faster, gets you assigned to a loan officer faster. There may be other information that's requested. After you've submitted your loan application, we may come back and say, we need to see some additional financial information. We may want to see your sales figures. We may want to see a profit and loss statement, things that support your request for the amount of economic injury disaster loan that you're applying for. There are some types of businesses that are ineligible for these loans. Agricultural enterprises, religious organizations, charitable organizations, gambling concerns, casinos and racetracks, anything involving speculative activities. While this isn't on the list, I've got some other ones just to go over real quick. Pawn shops, when 50% or more of their previous year's income was derived from interest. Real estate developers, life insurance companies, concerns engaged in illegal activities. The reason I bring this one up is CBD businesses, while they may be legal in the state, which I think is still a gray area, the federal government considers those illegal businesses. They are not eligible for SBA assistance. Now, you can be an ag-related type business, like a seed company would be eligible, but a farm would not, if that makes sense as far as what constitutes an agricultural enterprise. USDA and other agencies should have their own disaster assistance programs available for farmers. Applicants can apply online using the electronic loan application. This is the actual web link that takes you into the electronic loan application. But again, all you really need to remember is sba.gov/disaster, and that will take you to our disaster page, and you can press the button that says apply for assistance and get that process started. If you want paper loan applications, that website is there, and Nick has a copy of this presentation. I'm sure we can find a way to email this out to everybody so that you do have all the links and everything. The address is there if you do choose to submit paper applications. As far as questions, when you're in the system, let's just say hypothetically you're on page 5 of the application and you have a question about, okay, what should I put in here? We really encourage folks with question about the application process to reach out to the SBA's Customer Service Center at 1-800-659-2955, or by sending an email to disastercustomerservice@sba.gov. they're going to be the folks who are going to be able to give you a 100% accurate answer as far as what you need to do if you have a question about the application. Now, I do want to manage expectations. As you can imagine, this is a disaster on a proportion that we have never seen ever. No one ever has. If you call that disaster customer service center, you're probably going to have to leave your name and phone number to get a call back. There are 30 million small businesses in the nation. I would say a great number of those have been hurt by the COVID-19 crisis. A great number of those are probably going to be applying for SBA assistance, since that's one of the first things that is out there right now. So please be patient. We're spinning up additional staff, and we're doing the best that we can to respond to customer service inquiries. If you need help with reconstructing financial records, preparing financial statements, filling out some of those the information that is part of the loan application, maybe some help in determining, okay, how much should I be asking for here based on the damage that's been done in February and March, and then maybe trying to make some projections for damage that's going to continue to occur on into the next couple of months. We have our resource partners, our SBA resource partners. Some of these are either fully funded or partially funded by SBA, so they are part of our team. That would include the Iowa Small Business Development Centers, our SCORE chapters, our Iowa Women's Business Center, and then our Veterans Business Outreach Center, which is located down in St. Louis, but will assist businesses in their area of operations, which includes Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri. Other organizations such as Chamber of Commerce and local economic development entities may be willing to assist you as well. So don't be afraid to reach out to some of those groups to see if they can help you with putting your information together if you need that. You want to submit your application as soon as possible. Again, even if you're just kind of on the fence about whether you want to take out an SBA loan for recovery, even if you're on the fence about whether you think you can weather the current economic crisis or not, we certainly, again, we urge you to apply because, again, you don't have to take the funds if you're approved, but it's nice to have that approval in hand. If a loan request is denied, you will be given up to 6 months in which to provide new information and submit a written request for reconsideration. Real quick, I'm not going to go through all of these slides. Again, we should be able to get a copy of this full presentation out to anybody that's on today. But when you go into the disaster loan application portal, this is what you're going to see. These are the filing requirements. You're going to fill out that Form 5 or 5C if you're a sole proprietorship within the system. Again, you can fill out the tax authorization within the system. You can upload your most recent business tax return if we want it. You can upload a personal financial statement or use the Form 413 that is embedded within the system. The schedule of liabilities, that's within the system. But when you want to get started to apply, you click on Apply Online, and you're going to want to register. You're going to want to set up an account for yourself. You want to set up a username and password. This is what you'll use when you come back in if you're not able to finish the loan application all the way through. You could register today and go in and take a look around and just see what it's going to take from your standpoint to get an application completed. Once you register, you want to pay close attention to the sections that have an asterisk. Those are sections that must be completed. and you want to make sure that you have a good email address and a good phone number to provide to us. Again, when you go to apply online, you want to click on the business and nonprofit application process, and then that will ask you what type of business that you are. If you're a sole proprietorship, it's going to take you into the Form 5C. If you're any other type of business, it's going to take you into the Form 5. This presentation is designed around the Form 5, but a lot of the information that we're asking for is identical between Form 5 and 5C. You certainly want to make sure when you're applying for disaster loan assistance that you're including your state and your county, and then you want to select the appropriate disaster declaration. That would be the Economic Injury Disaster Assistance for COVID-19 for the state of Iowa. There's going to be several certifications that you're going to have to complete, and some truthful disclosures, those types of things, just typical types of things that will go along with any loan application. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the pages of the Form 5 today because we want to leave time for others to speak and perhaps take any questions, but these are just some examples of some of the pages. Kind of hard to see within this PowerPoint. I apologize for that, of just some of the types of questions and information that we're going to be asking for. And then there'll be a checklist for the filing requirements to make sure that we have everything that is needed. And you'll always be notified when an upload is successful. And you'll get a checklist at the end when all of your filing requirements are complete. And then you'll get a message once the application is successfully submitted. You'll get an application submission confirmation. You'll get an application number that it's been submitted. You'll definitely, you're going to get an email, but I always recommend folks write that down on a piece of paper somewhere just so you have it. If you need to return to an application and you started it, but you haven't gotten it complete, you would use your username and password that you set up earlier to go in and press the complete button to get back into where you left off within the system. Again, you've got your submit application confirmations. You can always go back in and check the status of your application by clicking status. I don't know how long these are going to take. I want to manage expectations on that. Our administrator, Jovita Carranza, put out a press release earlier today that was talking about we're hoping to get these turned around in 2 weeks, but it could take up to 3. For smaller loan amounts, we're trying to expedite those and get those turned around faster than that. But again, please keep in mind just the sheer number of businesses that are going to be applying for these loans. We will get to them as quickly as possible in the order received. And again, you can always check your application status. This example shows that it's received and in review. Again, if you have questions about the application itself, having any issues with the process, we recommend you call the Disaster Customer Service Center at that number or send them an email. We do not have access to the system locally here in the Iowa District Office in Des Moines. So our ability to try to help out with technical issues is going to be limited. But that is the essentials of my presentation. I know it was a quick overview, but hopefully as you get into the system and start taking a look at that, most of that will be self-explanatory and fairly intuitive as you go along with your application. That's all I had, Nick. Nick, I think you're muted.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
I followed my own advice, muted myself, so that's good. Scott Swenson, I want to maybe put you on the spot for a second here. I know this is a program that some folks who were flood impacted in the last decade navigated a bit. So I know you have some familiarity with this, and I know your team has been busy from a consulting standpoint with companies that are pursuing this and also keeping your eye on other things. After hearing that presentation, offer some of your thoughts and perspective and consult as far as to
Sure thing. So quick sound check. Can you hear me okay?
you're very quiet.
Let me pull a little closer.
There you go. Getting
Right,
better.
close up. Yeah, so first of all, to any of the business owners and managers that are on the call, my empathy for what you're going through here. There's no bigger deal than having your revenue stream severely reduced or non-existent. So understanding from a business perspective, this is about as big an economic impact as you can possibly go through. And what I want to try and offer here is maybe some thoughts and best practices, what we learned for previous disaster. Although, while that was a huge event, this one by far will be much bigger event. So a couple of things that we learned and really some credos was, number one, business help thyself. There's going to be all sorts of solutions presented out there, including what was just shared by Dave. And you really want to think about the things that are closest to home first and work back toward those higher level programs. So for example, I'm sure everybody's already done this, but they've already looked at what kind of expenses they can be reducing, what kind of negotiations they can make with key vendors, landlords, etc. I would always point people back to their primary lender and their bankers. That's where the relationships exist. And from the flood, the number one comment we heard from everybody was, the bank saved my business. So again, go back to where you have those key relationships and use those first. But I would really characterize the early response here as being kind of like when we started the business, and it's kind of a bootstrap approach. It's like, what are those things I can do that are within my control or that I have known answers to? So while a disaster loan may be an option, that's going to be weeks at best before you'll see that money. Dave has indicated that there's going to be all sorts of demand for that, and we know that's going to cause some backlog. That's an opinion I'm sharing on that. The other thing too is, we're going to have some fears going through any of this as well, and we have to kind of sort out what things are going to be more factual and what things are going to be more emotional. And so our tendency might be to think of the worst and over request the amount of funding we might need And while it's good to think that way, I think it's good to have a 1, 2, and 3 month plan. Put together the financial forecasts that are going to go along with that so you know what those scenarios might look like. But we do know that there's going to be other programs coming up. The state is probably going to be announcing programs sometime this week. We've already had announcements with unemployment and workforce development. Those were good programs, and try and take advantage of all those known things as much as possible. The other thing I want to point out about a disaster loan is it's unlike any other loan that you would take for your business. Number one, usually you're getting the funding for a loan from a bank or from a primary lender of some sort, and the SBA is the guarantor. In this case, with a disaster loan, as Dave mentioned, it's actually the federal government that's issuing the funds. So your relationship is different. It's not like with your normal bank loan. The other thing is, when we're doing a business loan, it's usually to improve the capability of the business. There's a return on investment with that loan. We're either buying equipment and improving capability, we're expanding workforce, we're buying a building, but we're either finding revenue enhancement or expense reduction efficiencies. And in this case, with a disaster loan, we're just trying to keep things going. So we have that loan now that's a repayment. We have not gained any capability. And in fact, now we're going to have an additional piece of overhead that's going to last for quite some time. So to the extent that we can, we want to try and make that an item of last resort. And the other thing I think that comes up quite a bit too is, as business owners, our personal income needs and our business income needs are kind of intertwined. And we're going to have to separate out what's a business need and what kind of income requirements I'm going to have to keep my family moving through this crisis that we have too. For the most part, we may need to finance some of those personal needs in a different way, whether that's drawing from savings or utilizing unemployment if that's within the realm of possibility, or whatever those things may be. But business need is going to be different than our personal need. And a new piece of information here too, that I'm glad Dave shared this, but if the loan request is under $25,000, it's got different collateral requirements. I think that would be extremely beneficial for a lot of people that choose to apply there. So if you can keep your loan request under that amount, I think you'll find that helps your situation somewhere down the road. And the last thing I would offer too is, some businesses are business as usual, some are in a diminished capacity, and then others are really at that point where they're shut down. And really the way I like to think about it is, we have to throw that business into sleep mode. Just like when the computer goes, we walk away from the computer at night, we need to preserve as much as we can cash-wise for this business. So when we come out the other end, we've got as many assets and resources available as possible. So if there's any efforts to bring in some incremental sales along the way, that's great. But you want to do that without spending anything to do so. You know, if it's because you have time and energy on your own to do that, great. But if you're trying to keep people on payroll, you got to make sure that there's a return on investment for those efforts, and that you're seeing positive cash flow for doing that. Last thing I would say too is, as Dave mentioned, a lot of resources available to help through this. Myself and my team are available to help with any of these cash flow projections if you need it. I've got some outside advisors that'll help with some of that financial analysis if you want some outside opinion on any of that. I would encourage people using a sounding board of some sort, whether that's another business owner or resources such as ourselves. But don't go through this alone. It's hard, and we're here to help.
Scott, thank you very much. Hey, Dave, I'm going to throw a question back to you. This is one I've heard from a couple of different directions. Maybe you answered it. I'm not sure specifically you did though, because you did talk about there will be other programs coming out in the future that we're waiting to hear more about from both the state and federal level. But if a business applies for one of these disaster SBA loans, is there any concern about whether or not they'll be able to receive any other funds, or would they be disqualified? I think in the past we used this term duplication of benefits. Is there any consideration at this point that needs to be thought about when businesses are being told, hey, you should all apply? Do you have any comments or response to that at this point?
Yes. So we have a part of the test on the disaster loan application is credit elsewhere. Do you have the ability yourself or through other means to overcome the effects of the disaster without using the SBA program? So you used a great phrase, duplication of benefits. So there's probably, I would hope that there would be some consideration given to that, given the scope of this disaster. But for a quote unquote typical disaster, like the flooding, things like that, if you're able to get funds from other resources, that may impact your ability to get funds from SBA. Again, what we encourage folks to do is to go ahead and apply for the funds from SBA, just because, like Scott said, and I had mentioned, it's going to take some time to get these applications through, just because of the sheer numbers that are going to be coming through. But an example of what you may want to consider is, if you can get a short-term loan, non-SBA, from another source right now for immediate assistance, you could use your economic injury disaster loan funds from SBA to repay that loan. You can't repay any existing debt that you had prior to the disaster, but if you incur additional debt as a response to the disaster, you can use those economic injury disaster loan funds to repay those short-term loans. Again, I'm not sure. We're hoping there's going to be some consideration given on other outside resources, but it's just something that you're going to have to navigate through that. Obviously, if you have something already in place before you apply, you're going to have to disclose what that is. I don't know if that answered your question or not. The other thing that I do want to bring up is, because I'm seeing some questions about how much do I apply for? Keep in mind that, let's say, and I'm just throwing a hypothetical number out there. Let's say you apply for 100,000 thinking, okay, that's what I need. And this thing goes a little longer than we're all hoping that it does, and you incur some additional economic injury. You can apply for a loan increase up to the 2 million throughout this process. So don't feel like you're only going to have one shot to decide how much you need. It is going to be somewhat difficult to make some guesses as to what your future need is going to be. Certainly, to determine what your immediate need is, we're going to recommend, what were your sales figures from this time last year versus now. That will help demonstrate, what the impact has been. remember the incident, well, you may not remember the incident period, but the incident period for this assistance begins on January 31st. So any losses that you've incurred since January 31st are going to be taken into consideration, even though it was really just a couple weeks ago when this really hit full bore here in Iowa. So, take a look at what you did for February and March last year, compare it to this year. Take a look at what you did October, November, December. I realize, if you're a seasonal business, there could be some apples to oranges comparisons there, but that will help you at least establish your baseline for how you've been injured, and then maybe help you make some projections as you move forward. Okay, what did we do in April, May, and June of last year? What do we think, if we're lucky, we're going to do this year, and use that as kind of a projection for what to request, keeping in mind that if at the end of the day what you requested wasn't enough, as long as you haven't already exceeded the 2 million, you can go back and ask for an increase.
Dave, here's a question that I received via email. It says, we are a small construction company. We have major loss of business since this started because many customers are canceling orders to start remodeling jobs because of the disaster. Is our type of business eligible for this program? I did not hear anything about construction companies listed among business types.
Yes, construction companies would be eligible. It was easier to kind of give a list of types of businesses that are not eligible versus those that are. But yes, a construction company would be eligible. And that would be one of those things is, hey, for February, March, April, May, we had, and I'm just throwing a number out there, we had $250,000 in construction contracts that have been canceled. Without those construction contracts, we're not going to be able to pay our employees. We're not going to be able to pay, on our commercial loan payments. We're not going to be able to pay our taxes. You name it. You go down the line. That is a very easy way to demonstrate to SBA what your losses have been. I see a quick question that I want to answer that just popped up in the chat. Does a real estate operating company, i.e. owner, landlord, for SBA, rental property type businesses are typically not eligible for SBA assistance. We look at that as a speculative or investment. So you can't get an SBA loan to, for an apartment complex. But my understanding is with these disaster loans that real estate operating companies, owner landlord situations can apply for the disaster loans.
This is a pretty specific question. I'm just seeing there about an LLC with an S Corp election. Which type of business would you select?
I'd probably start with the LLC. You're going to use the same form. The main thing is making some sort of differentiation between whether you're a sole proprietor or whether you're something else. As long as you're filling out that Form 5 for a non-sole proprietor, we realize that there's going to be some mistakes that are made as you go through this, maybe some information that makes sense to you, but once the loan officer gets it, you're going to be assigned a loan officer, and someone is going to follow up with you on the information that you've provided to help you take that initial information that you submitted as part of your application, tighten it up, make corrections, maybe make adjustments to the loan amount that you're requesting, those types of things, and help you finish off that loan application.
While we wait for just any other questions, I did want to take an opportunity to open up to any of our community banking partners who are on the line. I think as we talked about, we really encourage you to pursue this program while it is a direct apply to the SBA. to really be working closely with whoever your relationship manager is in at whatever financial institution that you work with. So with that in mind, if any of our banking partners have anything additional that they would add to that regard, I'm happy to open it up to any of your very brief comments.
Yeah, Nick, this is Josh. It's been mentioned, but I think it's worth saying again. You know, the business owners that are going through these difficult times, they're not going through them alone. There are a lot of partners out there that can help with this. So in the presentation, there was some information on, you know, SBDC or SCORE or whoever may be that may be helpful as they compile some information to provide to the SBA in their application. But you know, I think as bankers, you know, we can be helpful from the standpoint of helping them analyze their cash flow and making sure that when they're, you know, submitting their application, that there's a high likelihood, you know, for approval. You know, we look at that information every day. So I think community bankers would be helpful in that regard. You know, I think we can also be helpful by connecting folks. There's obviously some information on there on organizations to contact, but we also have additional contacts that we can reach out to, some personal contacts that could be helpful. And then I would just stress kind of making sure that the application is accurate and complete. Dave had mentioned that an approval could come as quickly as 2 to 3 weeks. And for some, that probably sounds like a lifetime. I understand that. But when you think about the volume and everything that they're pushing through, 3 weeks would be great for some. So just some things to think about. Be as accurate and as complete as you can, because you'd hate to have a situation where you're missing a couple pieces of information and you had to backtrack or potentially start over.
Dave, a question that I'm just seeing on here. It's about approval versus disbursement. Do you have any guidance as far as, you know, approval might be one thing, but then typically how long it takes for that cash to get in the hands of a business owner?
Well, from what I have seen, as far as that 2 to 3 week estimated timeline, that's for time that you submit your approval into SBA to the time that funds are dispersed. But again, like Josh said, you know, we certainly want to manage expectations. The more businesses apply for this, the longer those wait times may get. But you know, it's not supposed to be oh, your loan's been approved, but you know, we're not going to disperse the funds for 2 or 3 months. I mean, we're trying to get the funds out as quickly as possible. My understanding is that some funds in some of the states that were the first to get their disaster declarations, that some of those funds have already been dispersed. So we're trying very hard to move as quickly as possible in getting the funds into the hands once the approval has been made.
Dave, there's also, go ahead, sorry to interrupt you.
A couple of other questions that I see on here real quick. Would using business-owned real estate be allowed as collateral? It would be, and certainly you can pledge that first, but if there's still a collateral shortfall and you have collateral and personal real estate, you'll have to pledge that as well. The loans have to be collateralized to the maximum extent possible. So certainly, you know, we'll look at business-owned real estate first, and you know, if the collateral from the business-owned real estate is enough to provide one-to-one coverage on the loan, then we won't look at personal residence. But if it's not, then we'll look at personal residence. Nonprofits are eligible, but charitable organizations are not. Yeah, that's you know, it's kind of difficult to say exactly what kind of nonprofit is and what kind is not. Really, the main guidance we've been given is that any religious affiliated nonprofit organization, obviously churches, the first thing that come to mind, are not eligible. Anything that is a direct charitable organization is not eligible. If you have a question about whether your nonprofit is eligible or not, I would encourage you to call that customer service line, or better yet, send an email. Because I don't want to say, yeah, I think it's going to be eligible based on what I know, and have you go through the process of applying and then be told that you're not eligible. I would rather that determination come from the eligibility folks at the customer service center. I think we've already talked about the number of weeks. I own a business in Iowa and California. Do I apply separately? That's a good question. They are under separate LLCs. Just know that we can only do up to $2 million to any one individual. So you can do separate applications for the business in Iowa and the business in California, but you need to make sure that SBA knows that you've got two separate applications in. Let's see. If you've had an issue with identity theft, try to at least submit the 4506, permission for SBA to request your 4506T, but try to make a notation in your application somewhere that you've had an identity theft issue. Someone asked about employee-owned companies. They are eligible. Those are typically, we call those ESOPs. You would apply. I don't know if ESOP is specifically listed in the types of businesses under for the Form 5C. As far as the ownership structure, though, on an employee-owned company, SBA is going to require at least one individual to provide a personal guarantee. So keep that in mind. At least one individual is going to have to provide a personal guarantee. Is there a processing benefit to online applications versus mailed applications? No, other than the time frame that it takes to get them in. Because remember, if you're sending it in by mail, it's going to take the time to get there by mail. Then it's going to go into the big stack that's going to have to be scanned by our staff, and then put into the electronic processing queue. Whereas a application that is completed online is going to be immediately put into the queue once it's complete. I'm not even going to try to guess how many days doing electronic would save you versus mail. They'll all be treated the same. It's just a matter of how long that it takes in there. Can you use business assets as collateral? You can, but again, if there's a shortfall, we will look at personal assets. SBA fees and guarantee percentages. These are direct loans that you're getting from SBA. So there's not a guarantee on the loan. We're issuing the funds directly to you. There are no fees for these loans charged to borrowers. I think that got all the questions that I see. Is there anything else you see, Nick?
No, I don't think so. I've been trying to track them with you as well. Any of our other financial institutions that we touched base with want to provide some added perspective as far as advice in working with everyone's financial professionals? Or Scott Swenson, anything else as we've talked through these questions that you'd like to add?
Hey, Nick, this is Scott Frost.
Yes, Scott.
Yeah, for the group, this is Scott Frost, I'm the Chief Lending Officer at Collins Community Credit Union. I would say what I would encourage everyone to do is to get with their lender. Keep in mind, if we're doing our commercial process appropriately, we've probably already gone through your financials and helped you in previous months, so we can certainly help jumpstart any application process that you have to go through with this. Secondarily, I think it would, we're all circling the wagons, for lack of a better term, to see what we can do for our business partners. And I won't put any words in the other lenders' mouths here, but I'm sure we're all trying to make sure that we get through this as best we can. So please look at us as a partnership. And last but not least, because normally the SBA process goes through the lenders, we've got some people that are experienced with these forms and understand how to fill them out and what to do and what not to do that we certainly can advise and insight on. So please do partner up with your lender.
I know several people have been asking this, but if you haven't seen the text, we do have the slides that we just went through. They are posted to our website at medcoiowa.org. Go to our COVID-19 resource page, and it's the very first button. We'll get all this stuff cleaned up afterwards, but that very first button, you should be able to download the slides. And then just as soon as this all gets processed afterwards, we will post a link to basically anyone who wants to watch this webinar. It'll have the slides, basically just as we've just experienced it. We'll put a link to that online. That can be shared to all of your partners, all of your networks. I know we have other economic development partners across the state who are tuned into this. We will share that out to everyone who registered for this webinar as soon as that's available following the completion of this. Any other insight from our financial partners online here?
Nick, this is Kevin King, and I would just add a little bit to what Rod said, and that is to be proactive in your communication with your lenders. Instead of waiting for 2 or 3 months, just be proactive. It's much easier for us to work on the programs that are available or come up with one that's specifically tailored to your needs if we can stay ahead of things.
All right. Anyone else have comments? If you have questions, I think we've pretty well caught up on questions. Dave, I'm not sure if you've seen any final ones you add to.
There was a question about confirmation email. I could be wrong, and they may not be sending confirmation emails, or maybe the system is overwhelmed. If you feel like you've completed the form and have submitted it, you can log back into the system and check the status. If it says it's in review, then it would have gone through successfully. If it doesn't say in review, I would reach out to the customer service center and say, hey, I thought this was completely submitted. Can you tell me why it's not in review?
And there's a question posted just about if banks have folks willing to help walk clients through the application process. Not to put words in the mouths of everybody, but I would say yes. There's willingness of all the financial partners to help you navigate this together. So again, I think that would go to please follow up with whoever they are, and I think they'd be happy to assist you in navigating the process. So.
Yeah, two more quick things. Well, actually 3. Yeah, absolutely. Be in communication with your bank, because there are going to be some additional things that come down that are going to be run through the SBA program that are probably going to be run through the banks, as opposed to this program, which is direct from SBA. You know, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program was not designed to be a first responder tool. We are trying to use it as a first responder tool in this case. Typically, we come in with these loans, you know, after the flood is over, after the hurricane, you know, has gone through, and it's pretty easy to, you know, determine, you know, how long your business was shut down for and what the financial impact was. You know, there's also physical damage and physical insurance and all of those other things involved. We don't have that here. So, you know, there's going to be other things that come down. Stay in touch with your bank, because as much as we try to get information out and work with partners like Medco, et cetera, to make sure that the word gets out, your bank is going to know about new things from SBA as they come down. I didn't really want to talk too much about some of those things, but I will mention one thing real quick, because a question came up, if a business's local bank makes a short-term loan related to the economic injury, can it be paid off fully with the SBA disaster loan? Yes, it can. That would be a non-SBA short-term loan made by a bank to a business. The economic injury disaster loan can repay that. One thing that we are fairly confident that will be coming out soon is a program called SBA Express Disaster Bridge Loans. We've had them in the past for hurricane and flood situations. It's where current SBA Express lenders can make express loans to existing customers for $25,000 or less. There will be an SBA guarantee to the bank on that loan of 50%, and those express loans can be paid off in full with the economic injury disaster loans. That program is not in place yet. We expect it to be soon. That'll help lenders feel more comfortable in making some of these short-term loans. But right now, you can't use an SBA Express loan to do this. You have to wait until the Express Bridge Loan Program is announced, and we'll get information out there on that as soon as possible.
So again, just regarding that program that may be coming in the future, different than the disaster loans where you apply to the SBA, those are loans that you would partner with your financial institution to access, correct, Dave?
Correct. That's one that I'm confident enough is going to be coming out to mention today, even though I said I wasn't going to. But since the short-term question came up, I expect there will be several other programs through 7A and possibly Express that will be coming out that, again, you will work with your lender to apply for. But that certainly doesn't discount that there may be some additional programs that you would apply directly through SBA for. We'll try to keep everybody as updated on new things as they become available for you to use. But right now, what we talked about today were just the economic injury disaster loans, and that's what's immediately available from the federal government right now.
Okay.
Nick, another follow-up. As the longer the situation occurs or goes on, the more requests for information and opportunities for applications there's going to be. I would encourage everybody to keep their financial information as up to date as possible. You're going to be using the same things over and over again. In fact, even in your expense categories, you might set up special tracking categories in your accounting system for any of these disaster impacts. Much easier to run a report than it is to go back and try and figure out what you spent money on. Again, try and keep your financial projections on a rolling scale so that you can forecast what the sales impact is going to be, and just be ready to share information, because our elected officials are very much in the mode of trying to help here. The more information, the more specific information we can share with them, the better we can design programs. So let's try and make that information as seamless as we can.
All right, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Dave, and thank you everyone for your comments here today. Again, we will work to post the video of this webinar on our website, medcoiowa.org, just as soon as we have it. If you are registered and you're listening here, we will email you a link to that as well. So watch for that. Just as soon as the system processes, we'll send that out. And then also the slides are already on our website. Check those out. I encourage you again, just to reiterate, leverage the relationship that you have with your financial institution, leverage the partnerships that you have with various organizations. Some of you with organizations like us, some of you who are joining us across the state have various relationships with economic development organizations. Leverage those relationships and stay tuned for more. We're very confident that probably as soon as the next day, there will be different programs that will continue to roll out at both the state and federal level. So stay tuned for those. And we ourselves will work to keep you updated just as much as possible. So I think with that, Dave, unless you have anything else, we'll wrap this up. Everybody, keep your head up, keep working hard, and we look forward to getting through this together with you all. So take care, everybody.